Yes, guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance Podcast. So I'm on my own again today. Okay, I'm solo, and today I've got a few little topics I'm going to talk through. Things that I think are super interesting and just nice to have a good natter about, to be honest with you. And it's something I've spoke about in the past with other coaches, and I think it's always nice if you're not a coach and you're not in those conversations, just to hear some of the blurbs and that type of thing from it. So, what's been going on? A little bit of a let's talk shit before we get stuck in. What's been going on? Well, I'm wearing the world's tightest t-shirt. Apparently, didn't realize that till I looked in the camera. It looks like an extra medium. And it's a crop top as well, so you can't see it on the camera, but I'm like belly button showing, all that good stuff. So we're on Tuesday today. What would have so that was it. So this is like a last minute podcast type of vibe. So I wasn't going to be able to do one this week just because it's a busy week in general. And who was on the podcast last week was Stephen Cooper. So I know Coops from the IS. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go and listen to it because it's sick. It's so good. Like you just realize that there's totally like levels to strength and conditioning, and I think my thoughts are that a lot of the people from the IS are kind of on that level. I think they're just super smart, and Coops kind of says it in the podcast, but they always speak with such clarity and confidence and know what they're on about, and that's nice. It's nice to hear, and somebody that can just speak really well about those topics. So yeah, Coops was on the podcast last week. And he's actually going on paternity leave in a couple of weeks. So I've been kind of drafted in as his cover, kind of like a substitute teacher, just to take over para table tennis, para badminton, and wheelchair basketball. Okay, so I'm going to be covering for a 2-week period, just while spending some time with a new member of the family, which is exciting. So that's good for me as well. I really enjoy being in a different environment. It challenges you. I've a decent grasp of parasport, but definitely not the finished article. And I don't think anybody really is, to be honest with you, because it's such a complex area. But yeah, I love it. I can remember, I'm going to dig it out actually. I had an interview when I was at Sheffield Hallam, and they came in and did some filming, and it was to do with me doing a master's in sport and exercise science. And they're asking some questions like, what do you want from your career and that type of thing. And one of the things I actually said at the time is I want to work in Paralympic sport, and I'd love to get a gold medal or be a part of, the team that kind of got a gold medal. And I'm not yet at that point. I have a silver Olympic medal, not me, but I've been a part of the process. So maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is my small contribution, just being the substitute teacher. Yeah. So that's going to be in a few weeks, and I was supposed to be going in today just to have a little bit of a handover process. But he's actually ill today, so we're going to rearrange that. So yeah, this is why I've actually got a podcast in this week. Otherwise, it would have been. Well, to be fair, I always get ahead of podcasts generally. So what you're listening to in your ear right now has probably been recorded 2 weeks ago, which just gives me a little bit of a wiggle room. It just means that I don't do anything super last minute and try and put out dog shit information. And, it's not the way I like to do things, really. I like to be pretty organized. Kind of wrecks my head a little bit if I'm not. What else? This morning I had we had a new athlete signing up through Adapt. So it's cricket. Okay, so cricket guy, really ambitious, really trying to push his performance forward. And this didn't go out on social media. We didn't do any advertising for this just because he's on the waiting list, and we've got a few people on the waiting list, so I just go down that. So yeah, I got him started up this morning, which was cool. So looking forward to essentially this first phase for him is going to be building a base. Okay, that's one of the things with, I guess, being a coach and not necessarily knowing athletes right away, because you won't. The way you structure that first block is super important in my eyes, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So I always try and proceed with a little bit of caution. Okay, if they say, right, I want to train 7 days a week, I'm like, right, okay, let's meet in the middle somewhere. Can we do 4? And it's little things like that of slowly trying to build into it. And I guess people want to train 5 days a week because that's what their head's telling them. They're like, right, I want to go in, I want to smash it, I want to do all this, because they're super motivated at the start. But, if you've come from a place of like, this guy is just coming off the back of an injury that we're going to work through, he hasn't trained in 3 weeks. So getting into 6 days a week or 7 days a week or 5 days a week probably isn't the smartest thing from a training load perspective. So building him slow. Okay, 4 days a week, we'll gradually kind of ease into it and just make sure that it's good. Lower volume will gradually build up. It's just setting the foundations for future phases, particularly if you're not in a crazy rush and you've got time to really approach it smart and logically. I think it's the smart way of going about things. It's kind of like, I'm not sure if you've heard the analogy before of, you can always put the cake back in the oven, but once it's burnt, it's burnt. And that's generally my take on things. If you're in a rush and you've got like time constraints and you're really like, shit, we need to accomplish something quick. So really it's an interesting thing, because you've got to be really clear and direct on what you're trying to achieve, the timeframes in mind, and there's always an element of risk. There is always an element of risk, and you've just got to be aware of those. Sorry, I was just taking a drink. So yeah, started them up this morning, which is cool. So that's kind of where we're at. Just me and my tight t-shirt chatting shit. Right, so let's actually get into some of the topics that I want to discuss then. And the first one is probably going to be the one that's the slightly longer one of today's episode. And it's going to be around the idea of relaxation, okay, and muscular relaxation specifically. So not really going to discuss too much kind of psychological stuff, even though, I think it is a really hot topic at the moment, and probably for good reason, that relaxation, mental health, using meditation and breathing and those types of things to elicit a certain nervous system response more than anything is really beneficial. And I think, it's like Andrew Huberman speaking a lot about that. He's doing a lot of kind of podcasts and kind of bringing some of the research to the mainstream, I guess, through social media, which is cool. So that's good. I don't think nobody's going to hit every single time. I think some of the stuff that comes out isn't necessarily the greatest, or at least in line with my vision. That's probably more the way of saying it. I don't think it's necessarily in line with what I think, but that's human beings. You're never going to be all things to all people, and you shouldn't try to be. And he's putting out great work, and I agree with a lot of it, and I think it's awesome, and I think it's a net positive. But we're not going to touch on the nervous system side of relaxation too much. I'm going to kind of speak a little bit more around some of the practicalities of muscle relaxation, okay, where we're currently at with some of the research. And then I'm going to touch on some of the more practical sides of how can muscle relaxation aid you in your performance, okay? So what I want to kind of start off with is a little bit of a quote just to kind of get us going. So there is a researcher called, I'm going to butcher this, I got it written down. So Dr. Matveyev. Okay, so Dr. Matveyev, we'll say that, conducted a piece of research, and what he was able to find is that the difference between elite athletes and non-elite athletes wasn't their ability to contract the muscle the quickest necessarily. That wasn't the difference between them. It was the ability for the elite athletes to relax the opposing muscles quicker, okay? So it wasn't the contraction ability of the muscles, it was the ability to relax, okay? So, and that led to more speed, okay? So a little bit of a discussion around muscles, I guess, just to kind of set the scene. So if we take your elbow, for example, let's take the bicep and the tricep, okay? When you contract your bicep, you flex your elbow, so you start bending your elbow. So concentrically, okay, the bicep is shortening and the tricep is lengthening, okay? It is relaxing, to basically let the bicep do some of the work. And what we've got with that is the more that the tricep relaxes, the less work that the bicep needs to do in order to pull the elbow or pull the forearm towards your shoulder to create elbow flexion. So the more the tricep relaxes, the less the bicep needs to do. Or the more the tricep relaxes, the quicker the bicep can do what it needs to do, okay, with less muscular effort and less energy expended and all those things, okay? So, and this all comes down to Sheridan's law of reciprocal inhibition. So essentially, it is the idea of contracting a muscle and the opposing muscle is going to relax. Okay. And another way of kind of thinking about this, I'm going to try and paint you a picture with my eclectic words. I want you to imagine you've got a lamppost, okay, and you've got two people with a rope. So they're grabbing on opposite ends of the rope, and they have got the rope around the lamppost. Okay, so I'm stood on one side, the rope is coming up to a lamppost, and then turning off at a 90-degree angle is the other person. Okay. If I'm pulling on that rope super hard, okay, because I want most of that rope, the bicep, for example, the tricep can hold on and it can just be isometric in nature. So the other person in that rope can just be holding on. There's no movement that's going to take place. We're both fighting. Okay, we're putting in equal force to achieve going nowhere, essentially. The next stage along is if we're trying to create movement. So I'm going to start pulling. I'm putting in loads of effort in the tricep, okay? Matey boy on the other side is like, okay, that's fine. So he just loosens off a little bit. Okay. So he's still holding on. I'm dragging him with it. He's not putting in much force. He's just kind of coming along for the ride. I'm just dragging his body weight along with the rope. And that's how a lot of movement looks. Okay. Is the biceps doing the work, the triceps just going along for the ride. It's not helping. The next stage along is when we start thinking about relaxation and actually kind of piecing together some of the muscles. Is okay, I'm going to pull, but I'm going to communicate to matey boy on the other side of the rope. Walk with me, okay? Don't let me drag you. Don't put in any excess effort. Just walk with me. As I start pulling, just walk. Assist me in that, and you can see just from that how you get so much more work done. Okay. So obviously it's an analogy, okay, but hopefully it kind of paints a little bit of a picture of how muscles on either side of a joint can either resist or assist in terms of the desired muscle group, okay? So another part, and when we dig into some of the relaxation research and we get into some of the neurospace, so dealing with the brain, the spinal cord, and all those things, there's been research on, people with Parkinson's and different kind of neurological conditions, ones that really struggle with contract relax type activities because of what the brain is signaling. Okay, it's getting a little bit messed up by the time it actually lands at the muscle. And relaxing, okay, is an active process. So relaxing itself isn't just the stopping of contraction. Okay, it's not just that you're not contracting anymore. That is not relaxing. Relaxing is its own thing. It's kind of like a light switch. Okay, you've got contract, you've relax, contract, relax. So it's a light switch action. You can't really do both at the same time. So what we've got there is a really good kind of start point when we think about muscle relaxation and some of the research that's out there and how we kind of think about it. And it makes sense. So if you think about some of your sports, put it into your example, it could be that you play rugby, it could be that you're a boxer, it could be that you're a netball player, whatever that is, or a sprinter. And you'll hear these things coming up in sport all the time from sport coaches of, okay, let's take boxing. You're fighting stiff. You look slow. Okay. Essentially what they're saying is you're trying to load up on every punch. You're gritting, you're biting your gum shield, you're squeezing your fist super tight, and you're just trying to take his head off with every single punch. You're pulling every punch from your heel, and it's slow. Okay. The other side of things is, okay, or another way of saying it is smooth is fast. Okay. So you're trying to be smooth with your movements is what we're after. Okay. So that's like a boxing example. Think about sprinting. Okay, same kind of thing. We want it to be quick. We want the speed of movements. We want everything to be working together. We don't want muscles on opposite sides of the joint just to be pulling against each other and just fighting that process. Okay. So, and my adapt athletes will know all about this. When we program jumps and throws, more often than not, you'll hear me speak about being loose and relaxed and quite floaty and just effortless in your movement. Okay. And that's because I don't want it to be too muscular driven. I don't want you to be gritting your teeth or anything like that. We're trying to make it really quick. We're trying to make it flowy. We're trying to be like a whip. Okay. We're trying to just be really kind of relaxed and just move with it. So you'll get that. And that's one way I feel like, you can actually train this relaxing part of things is you need to get reps in of doing it. Okay. If you just go through every movement, every counter movement jump, every plyo, every throw, every sprint, just trying to muscle it, okay, you're not going to get more relaxed. But I think more time going in with the intention of executing your sporting skill or the gym-based movements or whatever it is, with an element of, okay, let's just be a little bit. Okay, let's just be there and do the thing. Let the muscles that need to do their job, of course. But it doesn't mean that, if we're thinking about a drop jump where you step off of a 30-meter box, okay, and you're gradually falling towards the floor, and at the last possible second is when we want you to pre-tension and stiffen up to then bounce up in the air. You don't need to be stepping off that box and instantly just gripping on, okay? We don't need that. That's going to slow you down. We know that from the research, Dr. Matbiev, okay? We want to be thinking about trying to be relaxed as possible until we actually need to stiffen up. And there's research on that from martial arts as well, actually, and it's the element of, they call it the double peak in terms of force. So throwing a punch, okay, so it leaves your kind of shoulder or whatever, that is when the first, element of force is happening, okay? So it's the start point of when you initially throw the punch. As it starts to extend and you're extending, your muscles are relaxing, okay? You're relaxing, or at least the ones that move incredibly quick are relaxing. And then just before you land the punch on the bag or the person or whatever, you stiffen up again. There is a double pulse, a double peak in terms of force. In between that is relaxation. And you'll see the same things in sprinting, okay? So yeah, I think that's one way you can approach your speed and your plyo and your power work, is actually have a conscious effort, okay, of trying to relax in those moments. The other one, okay, and these are methods popularized by Cal Dietz, is he's got a few different options, I guess, or a few different methods that he uses when trying to get somebody to train the ability to contract, relax, and be really quick with that. And for anybody that isn't aware, he is the guy who popularized the triphasic method, okay? And the triphasic method is essentially, a whistle-stop tour is grouping together training blocks based off of a specific muscular action. So the muscular actions being eccentric, so the lengthening of a muscle; isometric, where there is no lengthening of the muscle, it's static; and then concentric. Okay, so you group it into different elements of, so you might do 2 or 3 weeks on eccentric overload training. You might do 2 or 3 weeks on isometric and then on concentric. And the idea is that you're training each specific element of that muscle action, because that's what happens in sport. Even though some sports may have more of one than the other, there is still going to be a contribution of all those. Okay, but let's take wrestling, for example. Okay, they grip for dear life. Okay, they grip super tight. They're more isometric, I guess, in nature, because that is more of the frequent sporting skill that takes place. Okay, but there is still huge amounts of eccentric when you're trying to resist, getting taken down, or concentric when you're trying to initiate that takedown and that shot. So yeah, Cal Dietz basically popularized the triphasic method. Okay. It's good. It's a really good book as well, just for actually getting your head around understanding what goes on behind the scenes, okay, and what actually happens at the muscular level is worth it. But let's get into the methods that he kind of recommends. And the first one is oscillatory, okay, and this is probably the more popular one, actually. So oscillatory training is essentially, let me try and paint you a picture here. If we take a medicine ball, okay, so we take a medicine ball, you stood side on and you're about to throw it at a wall. So you're about to turn your hips, turn your shoulders and throw it at the wall. Oscillatory training is basically going to look like you're going to turn towards the wall, turn away from the wall, turn away from the wall, turn towards the wall, and then throw it. So you're going back and forth in a small small window. Okay, you're not doing huge movements because it's going to be too slow. It's really quick changes in terms of go that way, go that way, go that way, go that way, and then execute the skill. And it's exactly as we've kind of spoke about. We're flipping those light switches as quick as possible in order to get the body used to contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing. Remember what we said around the Parkinson's, and it's an active process. It is not just the cessation of contracting. So oscillatory training, and you can do that in a million and one ways. It's getting creative with how you approach it. You can do it in sport specific actions if you wanted to, and you see a lot of that on social media for sure, because it's the sexy stuff. It looks cool and it looks like your thing, so you want to do it because it's your thing. And that's the one I've used. That's one of the three that I've actually used. I've not used any of the others. And I think just as like a precursor to all this stuff, this relaxation stuff is our awareness over the research and how it applies is really slim. We don't have huge amounts of this, and our practicality and how to actually influence this is going to be little as well. So I'm not saying off the back of this podcast, right, I'm going to go in the gym and I'm going to do a relaxation day. That's not what we're getting at. But it is potentially one of the pieces of the puzzle. It might be 1,000-piece puzzle, and you may just be putting one puzzle piece in there. Okay. But if it's kind of leading you towards getting that full picture, great. So oscillatory training, okay, you can do it for different portions of squats and punches and rotation work. You can spice it up, okay? The second one is antagonistic facilitated shock method, okay? So AFSM. Essentially what you're getting at here is it takes it's really weird to set up, and what you're looking at doing is creating an environment where you can push and pull with a load, okay? You can push and pull with a load after each other. And by doing that, by concentrically pushing and then eccentrically pulling, concentric, eccentric, by going back and forth between those two things in a really small window, okay, so really quick reps, it basically feeds into that, okay? It feeds into you being able to contract, relax, eccentric, going between those muscle actions as fast as possible. And yeah, it's going to take a little bit of specialty equipment. You can probably do it with a dynamometer. You could do it with maybe some cable setups as well, if you manage to set it up well. Maybe not actually. I'd have to think on that one, but you'll see it. And if you want to go and look at that, it's worth it because it's really weird. And then the third one is reflexive trimetric method. Okay, so RTM. Again, not something I've done. I've only done the oscillatory, but what we're getting at there is the idea of you trying to relax, contract, and it's done slightly different. It's definitely focused more around the knee and the hip. And the idea with RTM is it's about taking the ankle out of the movement a little bit more, because when we do plyos more so, it gets soaked up by the ankle. It definitely gets predominated for the most part around the ankle, and that takes away some of the stress that you can kind of have upstream. So we want it to be more about the knee and the hip, and it's about you being able to relax, contract, and put in massive amounts of force. Again, a banded setup, and it looks like it's something you would do really heavy. I've seen Ben the Bounce doing these, actually. I don't know if you know Ben, is Sheffield guy, works in bobsled. Okay, so what we're trying to get at here is there's a few different options there, okay? And that's kind of speaking around trying to get faster and be more efficient at your sporting skill and all those things. The next one I want to go through is thinking about relaxing in cardiovascular-based activities, or to elicit an outcome from a cardiovascular standpoint. So if we think about a muscle, okay, when it contracts, okay, basically tightens up, okay, what that means is that you have then basically trapped the muscle in, so all the capillaries, the veins, the arteries, all those things. We've created an environment where you've occluded, you've trapped the muscle, and you've got all the blood and all the oxygenated blood and everything in there, okay? Because you're just going to hold that. Same as when you do an isometric, okay? If you do a wall sit for long periods of time, you end up with a burn. You end up with this waste product buildup, which isn't nice. It burns, it reduces your ability to produce force and all those things, and you don't want to repeat that over time. So if you go into a sporting action and you're stiffening up, you're fighting stiff, you're running stiff, you're being way too muscular driven, you're essentially occluding the blood, okay? You're keeping it trapped in that for long periods of time. In order to have a really, efficient machine, you would contract, relax. You get this pumping action, okay? Because you're pumping in good blood, you're pumping out bad blood. In good blood, out bad blood. It sounds like mud blood, Harry Potter. So what we've got there is another thought process when we think about, okay, how can we relax and what's the importance of it, okay? So just think about that in your sporting action. If you're sparring, whether you're sprinting, same thing. Don't try and muscular it too much. Try and keep it somewhat relaxed. You let the tendons do the majority of your thing, as much as you can, okay? So a few things to think about there, and that's probably took a little bit longer than I thought it would actually. And maybe off the back of this, there's not necessarily going to be hard points for you to think about, but there will be hard points for you to think about, but not necessarily hard facts for you to go away with and implement. But do a little bit of reading, okay? Have a little play around. How do you do your plyo work? How do you do your throws? When you're at rugby tonight and you're throwing a ball, how are you going about that? Are you a whip or are you kind of this wind up and lob type of guy, okay? Something to think about. So next one I want to kind of delve into a little bit is improper technique, okay? An improper technique is kind of a bandwidth. It's a continuum. Ideally with movement in general, okay, we're going to have a gold standard in our mind. We're going to have a technical model to adhere to. So if I look at a squat, I'm thinking, okay, my perfect idea of a squat looks like this, okay? And it may change from body type to body type. If you've got somebody who's super long, okay, their squat might look a little bit different to somebody who's really short with a big head, okay? You're going to have different levers. But having, as a coach and as an athlete, having an idea of what perfect looks like and what gold standard looks like, and that's obviously context dependent, but having an idea of what good is allows us to work towards that if we see something that doesn't quite look right. And improper techniques are a really interesting one. I was reading a book yesterday, What the Foot by Gary Ward, who basically has a model of movement called anatomy in motion, okay? And there was a piece in there, and he was speaking through specifically the foot. He's kind of the foot guy. It's not really I don't know if I'd want to be called the foot guy, to be fair. It's not the toe guy. You'd be fuming. But anyways, the foot guy, whether he likes it or not, he is feet. And he's speaking through the idea that we want to try and keep the knee in line with the second toe. And this is something as an S&C community, we've probably always pushed, is keep the knee in line with the second toe. We don't want it caving inwards. We don't want it to go inwards of the big toe. We will often call this valgus movement or inward translation of the knee and all those things. And he said he thinks it's wrong. He basically goes on he has 10 rants that he basically chimes through. And in that, he says it is wrong because any sporting movement, walking, for example, your knee goes inwards of the big toe, okay? Running, jumping, it doesn't matter. It happens. And it then leads you in this weird place. And he basically says, okay, so you telling people to keep your knee in line with that second toe, what you're then doing is, how are you translating to sport? Are you then feeding them into a situation where you're preparing them, or you're trying to get them to do something and be really strong in something that is actually never going to happen in sport? Okay. So his idea is, are you actually preparing them as well as you think you are preparing them? And it's a really interesting, you sit there and you think, well, actually, that generally is how we teach squats. And you'll never really get a right or a wrong answer with this. And my thoughts are, there are certain technical models when it comes to squatting and lunging and those types of things, where what is your objective here? I think if it comes back to that, if you say to me, right, Jordan, I want to squat the heaviest weight possible, okay? I'm like, great. We've got an idea in our technical model bank of what great squatters in the world do. And you've got two different people here. You've got powerlifters, which are very much about this knees out, external rotation of the hip and twisting into the floor to get those glutes on, chest high, big flare of the rib cage and get that lower back on. Okay, so you've got powerlifter style, super strong. Look at the other side, we've got Olympic weightlifters. Okay, Olympic weightlifters also in crazy, crazy shape when it comes to lower body strength. But what you'll see from them is, yeah, they'll clean it up, they'll squat it, whatever they're doing. They'll go to the bottom, great, looks nice. Start coming up, and you will see the inward movement of the knees. Okay, and you got two polar opposites there, both doing amazing things. So you've got a bandwidth, you've got a continuum there of the two. Okay, of those two styles, who would I want to be an athlete? Who would I feel more confident being an athlete? I would probably go more towards the Olympic weightlifter in a way, because they are not just strong necessarily in one fixed pattern. Okay, they seem to be able to translate in and out of movement. Okay, they seem to be able to go through this, flattening of the feet, the inward movement of the knee, which some people will quite often call valgus, and then come out towards the top. If they were going to play football, okay, or netball or tennis or whatever, where you're going to be exposed to those positions a little bit more, I'd be more confident about them being able to hold their own and do it well without risk of injury. Look, you put a power lifter, generally speaking, if they're somebody that just exclusively chases strength and in some really fixed patterns, I'd be less confident about them being able to do something fairly athletic without breaking. Not to say strength training is bad, okay, but the over pursuit of strength training without doing all the other stuff around it is probably going to lead you to a situation where you might be a little bit stiff in areas. You might not be as athletic as you once was. So yeah, that's kind of some thoughts on improper technique. And it's hard then, because as a coach and as an athlete, what do you then correct? Okay, you've got this, let's take a split squat, for example. You then got inward movement of the knee where it's going in over the big toe. Do we correct that? Is it a correction thing, or is it just movement? Okay. And going back to the Olympic weightlifter, argument, I guess, part of the reason that they say the inward movement of the knee when you're squatting on the way up is a good thing, and their argument towards that actually being optimal, I'll say that in quotes, optimal way of doing things, is as your knees come in, you then are stretching the glutes. Okay, knees coming in means that the glutes are stretching a little bit more. So it's like a slingshot. They're stretching so that then they can contract harder because they've got essentially more movement there. The other one is to do with the anatomy of the hip. Okay, as the knees translate inwards, we're then in a situation where we are leveraging the hip socket. Okay, so the ball, which is your femur, so the thigh, the ball sitting inside the socket is then leveraged a little bit better because it's pushing in a little bit better. Okay, so you then got a few examples of where it's actually more efficient to move in that way. And you just look at elite sport and you look at sport in general, it doesn't always look exactly as we imagine it. But I think, okay, going back to my previous point before I waffled, what we want to kind of do is start with the end point, I think, is what is your ideal technical model? Okay, what are you working towards? What do they want to achieve? Is it maximum strength? Is it movement variability? And in my training, in a lot of my athletes' training, not all, I will do a decent amount of, I guess, force production. Okay, we're trying to get incredibly strong in a thing, a squat, whatever it is, when we're trying to chase that adaptation of force production, because it benefits to this central nervous system, the muscular system, tendons, whatever. Chase that thing. But then, potentially at the end, when you're doing more of a movement circuit, okay, you may get them in positions that are really weird and wonderful. I'd rather you be able to operate in those weird and wonderful movements in a controlled environment like the gym. A good example of this is like Jefferson curls. Okay, if you haven't seen Jefferson curls before, essentially what you're doing is you're taking a bar or a weight and you're trying to round your back as much as possible, starting from the head, rolling all the way down the spine. I'm all for that. Okay, if you've got a joint, it probably needs to move. If you can't move a joint, then you're probably in a situation where if you are forced into an environment where you've got to move it, you're going to break. Okay, the plane of motion or the range of motion you do not train in is probably the one you're going to get injured in. Okay, so it's something to think about in terms of your training. Spice things up, maybe use your warm-ups as an opportunity to fuck around and play. Do it at the end. I'm not saying go massively valgus with everything you do. That's not what it is. But I do think having some movement variability and a bandwidth of movement is a really good idea. Okay. And a final point on that improper technique bit is sharing a story around one of the guys who I do know, who is a coach. He used to work with a BMXer. Okay, so BMX, you've basically got this big tall bloke operating on a really small bike. Okay, and straight away you can start to think, okay, some of the postures that this guy may need to adapt to in order to ride the bike. So you've got this hunched over, you've got a forward roll of the shoulder, you've got a big rounding of the upper back, and that's what this story is kind of centered around, is that upper back piece. And from riding millions and millions of hours probably on this BMX, because he was an oldish guy, I think he was like 30, say oldish, I'm approaching it. Not to offend anyone that's out there, 40. Okay, somebody who's 40-ish, which is not old, just older than somebody who's 30-ish. And what they started to do, they wanted to get him deadlifting. Okay, they identified his trap bar. Actually, they identified that trap bar deadlift was going to be a really good exercise for him to improve his lower body strength, which was going to feed into the bike. Okay, so he got him deadlifting. Okay, something he'd done for a while. Okay. And when he set up, he had big kind of kyphosis of the back. Okay, he was quite hunchbacky in nature. He was strong. Okay, so he was lifting away, and they were like, okay, that doesn't necessarily line up with our technical model of how we want a trap bar to look. Fairly neutral spined in a way. And they started to change it. Okay, so they started trying to get him to do trap bar deadlift. A little bit more shoulder blade retraction, puffing out of the chest, a little bit more of a neutral upper back position. And that is when he started to get injuries around the lower back, around the mid back, around the upper back. And, the point that the coach basically came back to was like, are we then doing a disservice trying to completely change somebody away from the way that they naturally move and a posture and a movement that they have practiced millions and millions of times and spent millions of hours in? Are we then doing a bad thing trying to change them away from that? Maybe, I think in that case, he was getting some injuries, so there's a load tolerance issue there potentially, too much weight for where he's currently at in the structure that he currently has. Doesn't mean he was lifting heavy, but somewhere around the line, something isn't liking it. And it's as simple as that. So I guess it's kind of a nice point there to wrap up on, actually, I think, is, like we've all got ideas of what we think perfect looks like, but perfect doesn't really exist. And the more I coach and the more time I spend around athletes, I see more and more reps that are different to what I thought. And I had an example of this yesterday with my rowing group, and we've got a lady in there who similar type of thing, a little bit of upper back rounding, just in her resting posture. It is there. It is not that she's not pulling her shoulders back. She literally cannot get into a situation where that upper back starts to be a little bit more, not flat. We don't want flat, but a little bit flatter than what it was. Okay. Because it was quite C-shaped. And I'm then like, well, how do I feel about getting her trap bar deadlifting? And what I actually settled on was, I think it's okay. Okay. And I think it's okay. We're going to gradually work towards a more efficient position to generate force, but I don't think she's one that's going to have a perfectly straight spine. I'd rather teach her to be able to use the position she's in a little bit better, her ability to lock in the lats and lock in the midsection to really create a strong posture to lift from. Okay. So yeah, I guess nice point to finish up on is, we've all got ideas of what we think looks like perfect looks like, but let's try and think critically around why that is, and do we need to correct everything? Okay, are we almost in an echo chamber in the strength and conditioning and athletic realm? Are we just in a situation where we're just regurgitating what we think we need to know? Okay, maybe not. Maybe all the certifications that we do as coaches are wrong. Maybe all the certifications that you do in your profession, whether it's sport or otherwise, are actually wrong. And we just take it for granted and we're not questioning those things. So yeah, obviously it was going to go deep and philosophical. So good point to finish up on for me. If you like these types of episodes, let us know. These two questions came from discussions, okay, that I was having with coaches and with athletes, actually. So if you like this stuff and you want a little bit more of it, just give us a shout. Again, just really happy with how the podcast is progressing, just getting good feedback, and it's nice. So I'm not a content, I guess I am a content creator. I don't know. I create content. So that's what I am now. As an S&C coach that creates content, the more feedback you can give, good, bad, or indifferent, just let us know. Without further ado, I'm going to wrap up this podcast and I'm going to go get a meal deal. I reckon I'm going to take a trip to Asda. Right. Cool. Speak to you soon. Thank you very much.